Okay. Hi, Camille.
Hi, Larry. Thank you so much for taking time to chat with me today. And I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about you as our Washington State David Douglas Award winner for 2019. Very excited to just chat with you.
Thank you so much. Let's get going.
All right. Well, I have some questions here. Could you just please share with me a little bit more about your background and career?
Sure, absolutely. I was originally trained in what's called ethnohistory. Ethnohistory is historians who steal from anthropologists a lot, and it's often to do with the native peoples of the continent. So I went to William and Mary for my PhD, and I trained with James Axtell, kind of one of the giants of the field. And I wrote a book, Ethnohistory. I meant to bring it out so I could wave it at you, but maybe I'd be violating some ethics policy there. I wrote a book called Plateau Indians in the Quest for Spiritual Power, using some of the ethnohistorical methods to examine how whites and Indians, how it was kind of a religious experience for the Indians, a religious question when whites show up on the Columbia Plateau. So how they use their religion to understand that moment, how it changed as a result. And, it was an academic book, which is to say, 10 people really liked it. And they were the right 10 people. So I was happy with that. About 10 years ago, I took a right turn in my career, as so many people do, took a pivot. And I became more of a public and digital historian. I came to Eastern Washington University. I also work half-time for the state archives. I'm an assistant digital archivist for the state of Washington, because the state of Washington's digital archives is located on the campus of Eastern Washington University. So I took a turn into public and digital history. I think what I've been most active with is a project called Spokane Historical. Spokane Historical is a smartphone app and a website for local history. And my students research local historical landmarks and sites where interesting things happen. They write up the stories, they choose images. It's really like a little museum exhibit each of them makes. So it's great training. And then it goes on the web with their name on it. So it's great for promoting their careers. When somebody Googles one of my former students, they find quality professional work at a good-looking website. I think it's been tremendously helpful for them. I'm involved in a couple other things right now. I've been partnering with San Juan National Historic Park out in the San Juan Islands, and we're developing something similar to Spokane Historical out there. You can find it online at islandhistories.com. .com or .org? .com, I believe. And we're putting together that. We also hosted a conference there last year called Camping Con about public history and the outdoors, and the participants came from all over the country, and we camped on San Juan Island in the national park. And the conference sessions were, hiking and things like that. I helped organize that with my friend Brandon Cadwell. And we're also going to be doing a public history field school out there. It got canceled this year because of the virus, but next year we'll have a public history field school in the San Juan Islands. So you can sign up for that.
That sounds wonderful. It sounds like a lot of fun. I know we had some colleagues that from the Historical Society join you there.
Yeah.
San Juan's. Great. Well, I guess what sparked your interest in history and pursuing some of these projects?
Yeah, I think historians get that a lot. What made you interested in history? Because to most people, it seems such an unnatural thing to be interested in, let's face it. And I never had a good answer for that. But last summer I was home, and my mother, we were just talking about different things, and she goes, well, remember that old cemetery at the end of the road? I grew up in New England. And so we have one of these old colonial era cemeteries, and the graves said on things of them, they have these epitaphs, and these people are Puritans. They're grim. And the epitaphs would say things like, behold, now ye who pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you will be. Prepare for death and follow me. And my mother explained that I actually learned to read from those headstones when we go on walks through there. And I think that's probably where my interest in history began. It explains a lot of other things as well, I suppose. That's why I was interested in history. I think I got interested in public history out of a desire for relevance. I taught history in college, and I enjoyed that very very much. But most people don't learn history at college. Most young people are not all that interested in history. It's kind of natural. And yet most grown adults are. About when you get to the age of 30 or something, switch flips and people become interested in history. They're already done with college, so where do they learn it? They learn it online, they learn it on websites, they learn it on documentaries, they learn it often in popular history books, and I sensed I could have a much greater impact as a public historian.
Wonderful, thank you. What can people do in their own communities to preserve history or document the world happening around them today?
What can people do in their own communities to preserve history? That's a great question. I think it begins with supporting the people who are already doing that work in your community. Does your community have a historic preservation ordinance? If you're a certified local government in the state of Washington, the answer is yes. And there's also a historic preservation commission. And I can tell you in most towns in Washington state, they are dying for people to step through the door and become involved in that kind of work. Your town probably has some sort of little history museum. It's open every Thursday from 2 to 3, in a smaller town. Or maybe it's a big professional thing like the MAC here in Spokane or the Washington State Historical Society Museum in Tacoma. But they often need volunteers. And above all, what they really need, your local historical society, is not your grandma's writing desk that's down in the basement. What they need is your time and your money. They need to be able to keep the lights on. So go ahead and join that historical organization. That would be a big help.
Thank you. My next question is, what contribution, and I apologize for the crying in the background.
Sure.
What contributions have you made in the heritage sector that is most meaningful to you?
Sure, absolutely. I think training students is the most meaningful thing to me. I have this wonderful job where I'm half-time at the Washington State Archives and I'm half-time teaching at Eastern. And the overlap in those two jobs is the students. I bring in students for internships in the state archives. Sometimes they're paid and work for a year in the archives while they're getting their undergraduate or graduate degrees. And they learn so much. And I'm so grateful to the archives for funding this joint position and for giving the professional experience they do to those students. So I have former students. At this point, I've been at Eastern for 10 years. I have former students in the National Park Service, in the Washington State Archives and other archives throughout the Northwest. I have former students working in libraries, working in historic preservation societies, doing all kinds of interesting history work. And I think that's what I'm most proud of. My other contributions, I think I talked about those enough. There's the digital projects. I have a blog called Northwest History. You can Google it. I'm not very active on it anymore, but it's pretty, there's a lot of material there. And I'm particularly proud of a Facebook group I founded 4 or 5 years ago, Spokane Historical History Researchers. You've all seen a lot of historical information on Facebook. Most of it's wrong. That's perhaps unfair. A lot of it's wrong. It tends to be in memes of a photograph and some completely unsupported statement or a quote somebody never said. And there's a lot of local history on Facebook, and it's mostly nostalgia. Who remembers cruising down Main Street? Oh yeah, that was cool. Who remembers the roller rink? Oh yeah, it was cool. Hey, who remembers cruising down Main Street? This infinite loop of the same poorly sourced memories. So I started a group here in Spokane based not on memories, but on research. And we've got 5,000 members, and some wonderful things happen on that group. A couple weeks ago, a woman got on from Italy. She was doing her genealogy, and one of her great uncles went to Spokane like around 1900 and died, and she didn't know anything more about it than that. And the people in this group, they uncovered the whole tragic story. He was actually a suicide. They taught her about the Italian community in Spokane. And one of the members of the group found the location of the unmarked grave in Riverside Cemetery here in Spokane, and set up a FaceTime appointment with this woman and showed her where her great grand uncle was buried. It was a deeply moving experience for all of them. It's the kind of connections you can make in the digital realm.
That's pretty incredible. Wow. Wow. What a great community of people you have too, just so willing to get involved and to help each other and help this random Italian lady. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. All right, moving right along here. If you could do one thing, leave one mark for historians 100 years from now, what would it be?
You know, to tip off the viewers, I got these questions in advance and I wrote down a note or two for each to remind me of what to say. And it's blank under that one.
Oh.
Because there's almost no historian alive today who will be remembered in 100 years. That's just not how it works. We need to be a little bit more modest about that. I mean, in 100 years from now, they won't even remember any of the Kardashians.
Well, let's hope not.
Yeah, indeed. Let alone a historian. I think we have an impact. All of our lives have an impact that echoes outward, but it doesn't necessarily have our name or our brand on it. I think I hope I've introduced a lot of people to history and gotten them interested in it. I hope they'll pass that along. It's hard to say, and it won't come attached with my name anymore.
But hopefully your work will live on in the stream of consciousness of the people of the state.
It's pretty to think so, as Hemingway once said.
Yeah. All right. What lessons do you hope people learn through observation and the study of history? Yeah,
I mean, we kick that around a lot, and we're in a current climate where history seems to have to defend itself, particularly on the university campuses where your dean wants to fire you and hire another STEM professor. You know, it seems like every day. My dean's wonderful, by the way. Hi, John. I didn't mean that about you. And, you know, people say, what use is history? And you hear different explanations of that. One is that history repeats itself, so you can watch for patterns. And I don't know that that's true. I think there are too many variables for anything as clear as that. What I hope we take away from history as citizens is a certain modesty. We can look in the past and we can see these terrific mistakes made by people who are smart and well-meaning and had a lot of information they thought, and they went out and they did exactly the wrong thing in retrospect, whether it was get involved in a land war in Asia or, you know, all kinds of missteps that we've made in the past. And so I think what history ought to teach us, if it teaches us anything, is a certain modesty moving forward. Don't be so sure you're right. Don't be so sure your opponents are wrong. We'll know in 100 years, but we can't know for sure right.
Wonderful, thank you. And outside of work, what other passions or hobbies do you have?
Sure, well, my wife and I, we love the outdoors and we get out there a lot. I bought an e-bike a couple of years ago. I'm 59, I'm entitled to an e-bike, I decided. And I get out there so much more than I used to. I've been enjoying exploring some of the many bicycle trails in Eastern Washington, some of which, like the Palouse to Cascades Trail, which goes almost all the way across the state, is very rough out here. So it's always an adventure. But even there, there's never, as a public historian, there's no longer any clear line between my time off work and my time on work. I'm out there outside and I always find an abandoned farmstead to go explore or a forgotten rural cemetery. You know, out here in Eastern Washington, there are more people in the cemeteries than there are in the town for many of our rural communities, to put maybe too fine a point on it. There's so much to see wherever you go. There's the terraced hillsides that indicate where sheep grazing happened 100 years ago. So I enjoy the outdoors, but even there, I enjoy the history that I find.
Wonderful. Do you have any thoughts on the current moment and how historical markers and sites are being reconsidered and looked at?
Sure, absolutely. This is a hot button issue for some people, and frankly, I don't understand why. These are just statues. People put up statues, people tear down statues. It's a natural process. If you Google the American Revolution and look for like images, one of the first ones you'll find is tearing down the statue of King George. Our country began tearing down by the tearing down of the statue, for goodness sake. I think it's healthy that we reconsider our history with every generation, because otherwise we forget it. The opposite of amending or revising history isn't honoring history, it's forgetting history. And that's mostly what happens. I've got a good example of that. Here in Spokane, our perhaps the largest and most prominent statue is to James Monaghan. And you're all go, James who? And exactly, James Monaghan, he was an ensign in the U.S. Navy. He was killed in 1900 in a part of the American attempt to take over the Samoan Islands, to use as like a naval station. And the Samoans had different ideas about that, so they shot him along with some other people. And anyway, James Monaghan's father was kind of a big deal in Spokane. Spokane was feeling its oats in 1900. It was growing quickly. So they erected this enormous statue of the guy in 1914. Nobody in town knew who this was until like a year ago. For years in my classes, my students, mostly in Spokane, I'd show them a picture of the Monaghan statue. I go, who's seen that? And everybody'd raise their hand. And I say, who is that? And they'll go, kind of look down at the crowd. So statues don't teach history. Nobody had any idea who he was until last year. For the first time, one of my students raised his hand. He goes, oh, that's James Monaghan. And I was dumbstruck. I said, well, how do you know that? And he goes, well, I'm Samoan. And there's a substantial Samoan, immigrant population here in Spokane. There's a community. And he goes, oh, I'm Samoan. All us Samoans know who that is. My mom took us to take us to look at it when I was little. She'd go, and he'd use some Samoan phrase. He'd go, it translates to like poor baby, but sarcastically. There's the poor baby who came to take away our freedom. Look at him up there. He was the only people in Spokane who knew who this was. So I think it's good and it's healthy that we reconsider our history. For every statue that comes down, let's put one up. There's plenty of people who we value and value for good reason. And in 50 years, if our children and grandchildren decide we're wrong and there's other statues that should be there instead, that's fine too.
Wonderful. That's great. Thank you. Well, wrapping up here, is there anything else you'd like to add or share with our friends and members?
Yeah, and I alluded to it before. Support your local historical society, support your state historical society, support the local one around the corner as best you can. Our history is valuable, but the history is all you don't support history by retweeting something or posting something on Facebook. You do it with your dollars, with your time. And I hope to see that, and especially the Washington State Historical Society. In the past, the Historical Society has kind of ebbed and flowed with the budget, with the times. And to speak frankly, sometimes when it's been in tough budget times, it's retreated to the museum, and it's become sort of the Tacoma Museum and State Historical Society. I think this virus has been extremely good for the society in one way, and it's pushed you into doing more digital work, more work that reaches out to every corner of the state. And I'm pretty confident that's going to continue. But only continue if people join. How much does it cost to join the State Historical Society, Camille?
You can get an individual membership for $50.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, and for $50, do you also get Columbia Magazine?
You get Columbia Magazine. You can go to the MAC. You can go to a bunch of different history museums and societies all over the country, in fact.
Oh, very good. So you can get into the MAC with the state membership. I didn't realize that. Very good. Yeah. That's what I'd ask people to do. Open up your checkbook, not all that wide maybe, and support history.
Oh, well, thank you very much for that plug. We certainly appreciate it.
Absolutely. And before you go, no Zoom meetings complete. We heard your toddler in the background before. Without an animal. So there we go. That's playful. She's kind of obnoxious, but there we go.
Oh, anyway, she's fluffy.
I am so happy to receive this award. It's really a highlight for my career, and I thank you so much for it.
All right, thank you, Larry. We're very proud to induct you into our class.
Very good. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.